It's that time again where we tell some ghost stories. From a lifelong haunting to a single terrifying experience, these 6 stories will have you glancing over your shoulder. A huge thank you to the writers, whose links can be found in the description, for allowing me to share these stories with all of you. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, please be sure to like and comment. Subscribing if you're new is also very appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. This story is 100% true. At least I think it is. Some of this stuff happened before I was born or too young to remember, and I have to take my mom's word for some of it. Without further ado, allow me to regale you with the tale of the sump pump lady. When my mom was a child growing up in central Michigan, around 1976, she lived across the street from a big red house. Within that house lived a man and his wife, whose names are lost to time. The man made very good money doing whatever he did, and his wife stayed home. She would often wander across the streets and sit on the porch swing with my grandmother, and chat about this and that. My mom was a fly on the wall for some of these conversations. She'd be playing in the front yard while her mom and the neighbor talked. My mom told me that her parents wanted that big red house, and regularly made offers to buy it, but the woman would always just laugh and politely refuse. "I'm gonna get that house from you one day," my grandma would often tack onto her firewalls, whenever they went separate ways. One evening a couple years later, the woman came across the streets with a battered face, as my mom put it. Her eye was swollen shut, and she had dried blood around her lip. My grandmother ushered my mom inside the house. My mom, a curious child, snuck just beneath the window behind the porch swing. The window was already open enough for her to hear. My mom said the woman was sobbing, and she couldn't make out everything she was saying, but she heard enough. The woman's husband had come home angry and beaten her. My mom said she remembers this bit of dialogue above everything else. My grandma: "Honey, you gotta leave him." The woman: "He said if I ever try to leave him, he'll kill me." My grandma: "If he said he'll kill you, he definitely will if you stay." The woman: "I know, you're right, but I just don't know what to do." My mom said that after weeks of talking with my grandma, she finally decided to leave him. He would be leaving for business and would be gone for a week, and in that time she was planning to pack everything up and be gone before he got back. It was a good plan, but for whatever reason, he came home a few hours after he left for the airport. She stopped coming over. My mom, her brothers, and my grandparents watched and waited for days, and heard nothing from her. After a few weeks, the house went up for sale. My grandma went across the streets and made an offer. A few decades later, my grandma would tell my mom that she did ask about the woman, but the man said she left him and never came back. So the man sold my grandparents the house and left. When they entered the house, they found that the man had put in carpet in the dining room. My grandma was furious. Nice hardwood floors existed beneath the carpets, and she immediately had workers come over and tear it up. In the dining room, the wood floors were stained with deep red blood. My mom described the scene. Ma lifted her hand to her mouth when she saw it. Her eyes turned glossy as she hovered over the stain, unmoving. Dad tried to convince her that it probably wasn't what she thought it was. He was trying to calm her down, but she was inconsolable. Dad told me and my brothers to go upstairs and unpack. It didn't sound like he was giving us an option either. The 3 of us unpacked upstairs, and as the oldest, I decided to lie to my younger brothers and tell them that a couple of dogs got into a fight in the dining room, and Ma was upset that the wood was ruined. It worked, but I knew. The house had a good amount of property around. The backyard was huge. Grandpa supposedly did a walkthrough of the backyard to see if he could find any loose dirt, a shallow grave maybe, but they never found her. They concluded that maybe she did leave after all, and the bloodstain was from something else. Maybe they just told themselves that to cope. In any case, weird things would happen in the house. Things went missing when they shouldn't have. Doors would open or close randomly. The television and record player would randomly turn on or off. As one of my uncles puts it, we were knuckleheads, but we never purposefully hid Dad's stuff from him. He'd have tanned our hides. We'd see lights turn on or off with our very eyes, but nobody believed us. We were just kids after all. But the craziest thing, and this happened to all of us, is we'd see Ma walk across the hallway, or hear her messing around in the kitchen, only to find that she'd been out on a run to the grocery store, or out in the garden picking peas. Nobody believed us at all. Cut to about 20 years later. I'm 4 years old, my baby sister is on the way, and my dad had gone on a business trip. My mom was in her 4th trimester, and didn't want to be home alone in case her water broke, so we went to stay with Grandma and Grandpa while my dad was away for the weekend. They still lived in the same house, and we'd be staying in the guest bedroom near the front door. My mom hadn't told me anything about the house, obviously. She didn't have to. My mom tells it. I was fast asleep and felt your little hand tighten around my arm. I opened my eyes to see you staring at the doorway. The way the moonlight was pouring in through the window, I could see that your eyes were as big as dinner plates. I asked you, what's the matter? You said to me, she won't quit staring at me, Mom. And I asked you, who? And I'll never forget what you said. You told me the sump pump lady. I felt chills run down my back as I turned towards the empty doorway. You were only 4. You didn't know what a sump pump was. You also didn't know anything about the history of the house. I felt a lot of emotion in that moment. I told you she wouldn't hurt you. She was just curious. You tucked yourself into my arm and went to sleep. The following morning, my mom told Grandma and Grandpa what I'd seen, and more importantly, what I'd said. For those of you who don't know, a sump pump is a machine in northern homes that pumps water out of a flooded basement. After my dad came home and the 2 of us left the house, my grandpa broke ground near the sump pump. That's where they found her. The skeleton was wrapped in a blanket, and the bones told the story. It had a few broken ribs. The jaw had been shattered and there were cracks running throughout the backs and sides of the skull. They reported it, but nothing ever came of the case. The sump pump lady still wanders her old home, watching over those who sleep, and maybe waiting for him to come home. My parents were planning on moving within the week. I was sad. I didn't want to move. There were so many memories in this house that I didn't want to leave behind. But alas, my father got a job out of state, so we had to move, despite my disappointments. I was worried about getting into a new school, and practically making a new life for myself. But after what happened before I moved, I'm glad I did. The day before the move, my parents and I went around town for the last time. We went out to eat, saw a movie, and went shopping. The same night, my parents were going to our neighbor's house for a farewell party. I wasn't allowed to go because it was an adult party, which is weird considering that I'm 19 years old. But I didn't make a big deal about it, and stayed home. I decided to watch a bunch of movies on Netflix. After the first movie I watched ended, I decided to take a look at every room around the house. It was sad that I was leaving and I wanted to try and remember something from each room. I got to every room in the house. Of course, I went down to my garage and basement as well. My garage was creepy, especially at night. My basement wasn't as creepy, but I've always had that weird feeling that I was being watched whenever I was in there. When I went into the garage, I noticed the light leading to the basement was on. I haven't been in the basement that entire day. I just figured it was my dad who went down to play Wolfenstein and forgot to turn the light off when he went up. I didn't think anything of it after that. I shut off that light and went upstairs. After a few more hours of watching movies on Netflix, I had gotten thirsty. I went to the basement to get some pop. As I went down, I noticed that the light was turned on again. I knew I shut that light off. I said to myself, I figured I must have bumped it when I went up. I went into that basement, got a pop, and went upstairs, making sure that the light was off. Another hour went by, and I started to think about the light leading to the basement. I knew I turned it off before, and I swear I didn't bump it. I definitely would remember that. I wondered if it somehow turned on again. My curiosity got the best of me, so I went down and sure enough, the light was on. What the hell? I thought. I knew for a fact that I turned off the light, and that I didn't bump it in any way. Maybe the house got broken into. I grabbed one of the hammers by my dad's workbench and went into the basement. I looked at every square inch of the basement and didn't find anything. I assumed that whoever had broken in must have gotten away. I left the basement, turned the light off again, and put the hammer away. I was about to go back upstairs to call the police. As I walked past the basement door, I heard something that still haunts me to this day. I heard the creepiest cackle I have ever heard. Imagine a witch-like villain from a Disney movie, with a voice that sounds like she has been smoking her entire life. That's what I heard, clear as day. I ran upstairs as fast as I could and slammed the door shut. I practically shit myself when I got up. I didn't go back down that night, or in the morning, not even to get my drum kit out of the basement. After that night, I'm glad I moved, away from whatever that hell was in the basement. I still have nightmares about it. Now I just worry about the other family that ended up buying that house. I hope they don't experience what I did that night. I have this bad habit of drinking a can of bubbly water before bed. It's a symptom of me generally staying up too late in bed doing things that aren't sleeping. Last night I really went through the water, scrolling through Reddit, before I finally flicked off the lights and burrowed into my covers. Around 5 a.m., I think, I woke up. I'd had a bad dream, but I still don't remember what it was, and I needed to pee. So I got up and walked 3 feet across the hall to the bathroom. Our bathroom has this dark light feature, just for midnight toilet trips. It's supposed to work so you aren't blinded by a full bright LED right after waking up. I flicked it on, and walked through the weird shadows it cast over the toilet. If you're a guy, you can sympathize with me trying to maintain accuracy in the dim light, half asleep. It took me longer than usual to wrap up my business. When I stepped back across the hall, I stopped inside my door. Something was in my bed. I took a step forward, thought I might be seeing things, but it shifted, a twitchy movement. Thinking back, I can only think of an animal waiting to pounce. I thought for a minute I might be dreaming again, but I was too awake to be dreaming. I could feel the breath catching in my lungs, the paralysis sinking into my muscles. Was totally aware of my brain stuttering out of its sleepy stupor. A story came to mind of a mentally disturbed man breaking into Nicolas Cage's house, naked and eating a fudge cycle. But something instinctual sunk down into my gut, telling me this wasn't that. Then it spoke. Jeremy. It rolled over. All I could make out were 2 glowing yellow eyes. I ran. I don't remember deciding to run. My body shook off its fear and bolted for the bathroom. As I turned to slam the door, I thought I saw a pair of yellow eyes in my bedroom doorway. I locked the door and hit the wrong switch. The dark light came on and I was coated in weird shadows. I fell to the floor and curled up against the sink. It was just outside the door, pacing. Jeremy. Its tone was feminine, but off in a way I couldn't quite place. It paced for a while. I could hear its soft footprints barely creaking the floorboards outside. A sob was caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, but it was just like I'd always worried might happen to me. Fear took my voice and all I could do was suck in a shaky breath and try to keep from passing out. She stopped pacing. Then, underneath the doorway, 5 fingers slid into view. Maybe it was the light, but they reached farther under the door than any fingers should, reaching towards me. I lost it. I started crying, scrambling back into the wall. I yelled at it to go away. Please, just leave me alone. Jeremy. Femininity had leaked out of its voice, leaving something else behind. My parents found me like that a few minutes ago. 7 a.m. of the 11th, whenever you're reading this. They chalked it up to bad dreams and bubbly water. Listen, I wasn't dreaming. I know the difference. And I know I can't sleep in my room tonight. By the way, my name's not Jeremy. This is going to sound like absolute bullshit, but it's true. And I'd like serious answers. If you have any idea what this thing is, please let me know. Last Halloween, my friend Bev and I went to a theme park turned horror attraction called Scarywood. When it's not October, it's called Silverwood. During this time, the staff dress up as zombies, clowns, chainsaw maniacs, etc. There's an abundance of haunted houses, but some of the actual rides are still open. We walked through a few haunted houses and decided to stand in line for the spin cycle, a high-intensity ride. During our wait, I asked Bev if she had any more paranormal experiences she wanted to share. That's actually one of the highlights of our friendship. We feel comfortable sharing stories that other people would accuse were fake. We've both been called stupid for believing in the supernatural by lots of people, so it's nice to have a conversation about it without being judged. I've had my fair share of experiencing spooky events, but Bev is on a different level than me. She's seen way more creepy things than I have. I guess her third eye is more open than mine, if that's right terminology. When she says there's been nothing new lately, I ask her about any ghosts or whatever she's seen in general. My memory's pretty bad, so I'm sure I've forgotten some of what she's told me. Bev gives me a weird, almost guilty look, and confesses that there's a story of hers with me in it. We've been friends for about 10 years, but we've only been in a freaky situation together once. That situation involved a ghost that we saw and I heard. Nothing very bad at all. Her expression tells me that it's not the ghost. Again, my memory is a piece of garbage, so the following conversation is along the lines of how it went. Bev tells me about this shadowy thing that she's seen around her house on rare occasions. According to her, it's most likely pretty evil. Basically, it'll kind of wander around the house for a time, then vanish. Once in the middle of the night, the thing came into her bedroom. Obviously freaked out, Bev pretended to be asleep. She felt a weight on her bed and opened her eyes. The thing had its head cocked, stared at her for a little while, then moved to the bed under hers. She was on the top of a bunk bed. This part's important. Bev described this creature as jet black, like a shadowy figure. It was bald, as far as she could tell, and had a human upper body. Its eyes were the most vibrant red she'd ever seen. I know that sounds like such a cliche, but that's what she said. The eyes had no pupils or retinas. They were like glowing spotlights. I can't remember if she said it had a nose, mouth, or ears. Its hands were bigger than a human's. Its fingers were either just long or it had claws. The feet, though, are where this gets weird. I think Bev described its knees as backwards, and that it had hooves for feet. Either that or clawed feet like a raptor. I have no idea why the raptor feet are my second guess, if my memory's wrong. But that's it for a description. Then she said something about it being 3 days behind. That made me shiver a bit. Wait, it's 3 days behind you? I said. No, behind you, she replied. My blood ran cold. I've seen supernatural things, but I've never seen something even close to what she described. Nervously, I explained that if it was 3 days behind me, it should have caught up by now. After all, I was in college. I had pretty much the same schedule every day. If I was sitting somewhere on Monday, I'd probably return to that same spot on Thursday. That's not even mentioning that I slept in the same bed every night. Bev only shrugged. What do you think it wants from me? It probably wants to possess you and make you suffer. Something like that. She said. So that's that. A day after that Halloween, I searched the web for possible entities that this thing could be. Obviously, it might be a demon, but that's a pretty general term. The closest match to Bev's description is a jinn, a spirit from Muslim lore. Again, it's a pretty broad term, but I've read some stories about people coming across jinns. The majority of them point out that the spirit's eyes are extremely bright, and sometimes red. However, I've never heard of a jinn following 3 days behind someone. I also live in the USA, not the Middle East, and I don't know if jinns go outside of their mainland. Does anyone know of any creatures that match this description and follow people? When I was little, I lived my life in fear every night. My nightlife affected me so much as a child. I am an insomniac today. I can't remember exactly when it first started, but I have always seen things. It just happens that was the worst time in my life. Or at least I thought so. I'll never forget the townhouse me and my mom first lived in. You open the front door, to your right is the stairs, to your left is the kitchen. If you keep going straight, it's the dining room and living room, with a patio sliding glass door that leads to our backyard, with a huge oak tree back there. If you go upstairs, my mom's room is straight ahead, and my room is opposite of hers. The bathroom is in between. I remember this place so vividly, because that's where I started seeing it. Maybe it's because that was my first time having my own room. We used to live with my grandparents beforehand. When we first moved, I was around 5, and I slept with my mom the first few weeks, until she completely decorated my bedroom to make me more comfortable sleeping alone. Back in the early 90s, bedtime around 7:30 p.m. was normal, and the nights seemed to be darker back then. I would always fall asleep as normal, but always wake up later in the night when my mom was in her room sleeping. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and I was heading back to sleep. But I noticed someone in my room. I had a bunk bed and always slept in the top bunk. I looked over the rail to see if it was my mom, but it wasn't. I'll never forget how much fear I used to be in every night. I would see this shadow figure, very tall and dark. Something inside always told me that it was a dangerous man, and I believed that he wanted to hurt me for whatever reason. I started screaming and crying real loud, and threw my blanket over my head. My mom would wake up and turn my light on to ask what was wrong, and I told her a man was in my room and she got scared. She called my grandparents and they came over to check our house, but no one was there. They all felt bad because they said it was a nightmare I experienced. I never doubted what I would see when I was alone. This would happen every day for months, where my mom was having tireless nights waking up to calm me down. She stopped calling my grandparents and started taking me to her room to sleep. It was getting worse. I would see the shadow figure standing by my closet door, and now it's standing right by my bunk bed. I could see it through my sheets, leaning over me real close, just watching me. Even when Mom took me to her room, it would lean in the doorway, watching me lay with her, and she would tell me to close my eyes so I couldn't see it. I knew something was wrong with me back then, because I was seeing things at night no one else was seeing. My family is superstitious, and they believed I could see spirits. My mom didn't want to entertain the idea, because she didn't want me to get worse than I was. It came to a point my mom wasn't getting any rest with me, so I would spend the night at my grandparents' house. They wouldn't let me sleep alone, because they believed I was seeing spirits the entire time. My grandmother would light a white candle, and speak prayers over me. She always rubbed oil on my neck, and I would sleep the night away. At first they thought I was just seeing this at my house. One weekend my cousin and I stayed at our grandparents' house, and we were downstairs playing Mortal Kombat on the Super Nintendo. When we were done playing, we turned the TV and light off, and went to the stairs. My cousin told me to look into the living room, and there it was. The shadow at the end of the hallway looking at us from the living room. I looked at my cousin to see his reaction, and he started screaming. My grandparents came downstairs, and I let my cousin tell them what we seen. At this point, they either felt I started making him see what I was seeing, or they knew something sinister was at work. Years went by with the torture of having this shadowy stalker watching over me every night. My cousin stopped talking about it one day, so I knew I was alone, if something were to happen again. Years later, my sister was born, and things calmed down for a number of years. I started feeling comfortable at night, and my haunting became an old memory I didn't want to remember. I graduate high school and I'm an adult, who has a life of my own now. I told many friends my story of the shadow people, and to my surprise I heard similar stories when I thought I was alone in the experience. When I seen mine as a tall, broad man with a blank face that appears so empty yet sinister. Some say they've seen a man with a top hat, or even a woman with a veil over her face. However, we all agreed on that unexplainable fear we would feel from the shadow people. Well, I thought this was a distant memory of the past. I can't believe I've come across this entity again. It started back again months ago, before the fall came into the air. I got off of work and it was around 1:15 a.m. The weather was nice enough, and Uber was taking too long, so I decided to walk home. I understand it was hurricane season and some of the power may have been out in the streets because of the crazy winds we've been getting from tropical storms. The wind wasn't blowing hard at all, but the entire city was having random power outages. Fortunately, my power was on, because I called my sister and she checked for me. But I had to walk through the darkness to get home in the light. Everything was fine and I felt I shouldn't put in my headphones, because I wanted to be more aware of my surroundings at that time of night. Especially because of the power outage, and not knowing if there was anyone else out. So I'm walking down the sidewalk, and I feel like someone is watching me. I look ahead of me and nothing's there. I look across the street and it's only a car turning into another road. Then I start thinking of what's behind me. I get a little nervous, and I grab my pocket knife in my hand. I keep walking, but I felt like it was getting closer to me. I turn around and there it is again. A tall, black shadow right behind me. I couldn't believe my eyes, and I stared in awe. I yelled, "Why are you back?" It just stood there, staring at me, yet it felt like it was getting closer. I wasn't a child anymore. I couldn't call anyone to save me from ghosts or my imagination. I ran as fast as I could until I got to my block. The entire time I felt like it was following me, watching my steps to see where I was going. It knew exactly where I was. It never left. I just mentally blocked myself off without knowing. Today I get glimpses of shadows in the corner of my eye, watching behind me while I'm looking in the mirror, and even stalking me at night, not caring if I notice it or not. I don't know why this has been happening to me for over 2 decades, but I now understand that there will always be a reminder of my past, because it never left. I will always be haunted by shadows. Whether or not you believe me, I know what I saw wasn't natural. Something that wasn't supposed to happen. Before this incident, I had no problem with driving at night. It was a bit difficult, sure, but nothing to get so worked up about. But now I really can't bring myself to drive at night, especially alone on a long, empty road. So if there was an emergency in the middle of the night, you would not be able to get me to leave my house and go driving. It just won't happen. It was during the summertime, and I had been taking extra classes. My class had gone on for a while, and so when I emerged from the building it was already dark outside. No problem, I've driven at night from college to my house. Why it had happened that night and no other time, I don't know. Wrong place at the wrong time, I guess. All was silent in my car as I drove through the familiar road. I won't say where I'm from. but I can tell you it can be very empty at night, with huge fields stretching across college and the area where I live. There were turns here and there, and every now and then I'd pass by other cars. I enjoyed these types of drives. My phone then went off, 5 minutes into my commute. To say it scared me was an understatement. It nearly made me swerve off the road and into the corn stalks that were ready to be picked. I managed to pull off the road and glance down. Seeing it was my girlfriend Katie, I answered the phone.
"Hey babe,"
she said, sounding sleepy.
"Where are you?"
We shared an apartment together, a bit near my parents. But far away, we had a good distance between them. "I'm at the cornfields," I responded, rubbing my forehead and checking the rearview mirror.
"You better not be driving,"
she sighed, and I could hear her rustling through the cabinet, aka snack hole, where we keep our chips and other snacks.
"Last thing I want is a dead boyfriend. Who's going to help pay rent?"
"Thanks so much for the concern," I said through gritted teeth. "Your call actually almost made me crash, so I'm parked on the side of the road. What's up?"
"Just letting you know I woke up from my nap and I'm ready for movie nights. I'm thinking of ordering a pizza. Cheese pizza this time around. What you say?"
Why were you in the snack hole? Katie probably ate more snacks than I do, but I don't mind when she does that. Just seemed a bit wasteful to eat chips than order pizza. "Fine by me," I responded. "I'll be home as soon as I can. Love you, babe."
"Love you too,"
Katie answered with chips in her mouth. Never change, Katie. Never change. Shutting off my phone and tossing it on the passenger seat, after turning it silent, I straightened up and released the parking brake. Just as I placed my hand on the gear shift, I realized something. It felt like there was a heavy pressure in the car. I'm not sure how to explain it, but you know how people who visit concentration camps report about the heavy atmosphere that can be there? It was like that, I'd say at most. It also felt like heavy pressure, the kind you get high in the mountains. It was unsettling. A glimmer in the rearview mirror caught my eye, making me glance up and stare at it. It looked like bright lights. Oh great, someone with high beams. I thought to myself, somewhat annoyed. Instead of having some jerk follow behind, I decided to wait it out and let the guy pass me and get enough distance, so I didn't have to be near him. I really wish that had been some jerk with bright lights. To my shock, what passed me was not a modern car, but an old-fashioned hearse drove by. It had a ghostly glow to it, the kind you'd see in ghost movies. I couldn't see the driver, but I could see what came after it. Following behind were several old cars, 7 in total, all glowing as well. It was like a pale whitish blue, but it was something else that made my heart drop. The windows on these cars were rolled down, and I could see the people in them, and they looked like dolls that had been rescued from a junkyard. Mangled bodies, missing heads. One person, one thing, was missing their skull, but the remnants of their jaw remained. It was something out of a ghost book or something. Something that would give children, and maybe even some adults, nightmares. I was terrified and couldn't move. As the last car drove by, I glanced out of the windshield to watch. It was like I couldn't look away from it. Something kept my eyes locked on the ghastly procession. Jaw hanging open, I watched as the ghostly glow slow faded from view. I blinked and could move again. Shuddering, I blinked several times, then shifted the gear into drive, and eased the car back onto the road. The atmosphere had lifted a bit. I stared ahead thinking, what did I just see? What I wish I had seen, in the time I blinked, was a giant pile of cars. Letting out a scream, I swerved and crashed. I lived to tell the tale, thankfully. I was knocked out by the crash, but luckily for me all that happened was whiplash, a concussion, some bruising and sore muscles. A small family coming back from vacation came across my car and called an ambulance. I woke up in the hospital with Katie by my side. berating me for crashing and being a reckless idiot. As a police officer came to talk to me, I asked him, had there been any severe accidents on the road? His jaw slowly clenched. Why do you ask? I could tell he knew something. When I stared at him questioningly, he sighed. A long time ago, there was a pretty bad accident near where you crashed. Same spot if I heard right. It was a funeral procession for the grandfather of a family. It was a brutal crash, and no one was sure what caused it. But I can say this, there were no survivors. He left without asking any questions, which was strange. Since then, I haven't been on the road at night, and I don't plan on ever doing that, and I'll often jerk away at night, hearing the squeals of tires and a large, loud crash echoing in my ears.